Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Derek Thompson. I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic magazine. I cover business, econ, and tech. This is John Doerr, chairman of venture capital at Kleiner Perkins, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Measure What Matters. So before we get to the book, I want to talk a little bit about you, John. Tell me the story of how you got to Silicon Valley. I love hearing about how icons that become to some sort of synonymous with their industry fall into that industry. Were you the sort of 10-year-old who knew you wanted to be a venture capitalist, who arranged his stuffed animals and made them sort of pitch company ideas to you?
No, stop.
Okay.
I was not that. I'm one of 5 kids who grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, middle-class family. My dad's my hero. He was an engineer. I wanted to be an engineer. He started a company. I wanted to start my own company. I wanted to be in the computer business. There wasn't much of that in St. Louis. So I got in my car and drove west, figuring I'd apprentice myself to some venture capital firm. And of course, as you might imagine, they all turned me down. That didn't happen. But what was happening that summer was my girlfriend had dumped me, and I was trying to find her. She was hiding from me, literally, in Silicon Valley. So I couldn't find her. One of the venture capitalists I talked to said, you might think about a job at this new chip company we started by the name of Intel. So I cold called my way into the highest executive I could find there, Dr. Bill Davidow. He's chapter 3, I think, in this book. And by the end of the day, I had a summer job writing benchmarks, which is how fast Intel's microprocessors go compared to the competitors. Guess whose office was down the hall from mine? And so she kind of hit the ceiling. But over the course of the summer, we put the relationship together. And so I got not only to work under the amazing Andy Grove and learn about how he achieved excellence in his team, but I got to put my relationship back together again.
You've been at Kleiner Perkins now for 38 years?
Since 1980.
Since 1980. You've had some incredibly successful bets, but there's been a lot of bets. And there must have been some bets that turned out to be flops.
Lots.
Lots. What flop, what failure stuck with you the most, that you learned the most from?
Well, I think my most famous failure was Segway, which is just now a two-wheeler, $10,000 machine, sidewalks. It's coming around now, two-wheeler, scooters on the sidewalks. But that's not the one I learned the most from. I think the biggest learning was from a company called Go.
Go.
Which was the iPad 20 years ahead of its time. It was the brainchild of Mitch Kapor, who invented 1, 2, 3, and Jerry Kaplan. And they thought the idea of making I don't have mine here, a tablet that you could write on that would recognize your handwriting would be immensely valuable in the next wave after personal computers. There were several problems with Go, one of which was it didn't work. Another was it was pretty expensive. But, and the third...
Other than that?
Other than that, it was... here's the lesson I learned. I recruited a great CEO into that company, a man known as the Coach, Bill Campbell. This book is dedicated to Campbell and Andy Grove. And he taught me the lesson of how you wind down a failed venture with dignity for all the employees. And the job market wasn't quite so hot then in Silicon Valley, so we set up placement services, voicemail boxes, email. We tracked. We made sure that everybody on that team got a job. We didn't let the venture persist. When it wasn't going to make it, it would have been a waste of everybody's career and time. And then I went on to back every one of Bill's vice presidents or chief business officers, 5 of them as CEOs or founders, and we made money on every one of those investments. So he assembled a very high-quality team, and he always put that team very first.
What would be the lesson that you took from Go? Is it faith in people over products? Is it something more subtle?
It's the power of the team and how a transformational leader can partner with a founder. So the founder, Jerry Kaplan, he's written another book called Startup about this experience. I recommend it. It could have been called Screw Up, but lots of times to make these companies really, really go, you need a great CEO like my friend Jim Barksdale in the front row here. He partnered up with Mark Andreessen, and if he hadn't, Netscape wouldn't have happened. I guarantee you, the internet would have been set back. And it's a kind of rare alchemy of a purpose-driven, confident, experienced leader who can come in with the humility and the grit to allow a visionary entrepreneur to achieve her or his dreams. That's the lesson I learned from Go.
That's great. Let's turn to the book, Measure What Matters. The tagline talks about rocking the world with OKRs. What is an O? What is a KR? And why should anybody in this crowd care?
Let's do the last question first. Do you care about teams? Are you part of a team or even a family? And if so, is your team really focused and aligned and committed in tracking its progress and stretching for amazing, almost unachievable goals? Show of hands. For how many of us is that true? About 10% of the audience? You know, in most organizations in the US, the very idea that people would write down their goals and then make them publicly available inside the whole organization and do so regularly, every 90 days or so, and then grade them, and at the end of the period, take the grades and cast them aside. Because you don't want these used for bonuses or promotions. They're for a higher purpose, a kind of collective calling to a social contract of alignment. Well, that's what Andy Grove's system of OKRs did for Intel. And there's a great story in this book about Operation Crush, where Intel almost lost the whole thing. It frankly had a pretty crummy microprocessor, the 8086. 68,000 was a better solution. But he was able, in a few weeks, to rally the whole company to confront this crisis and overcome it. So I'm a big believer in this system, but it's not a silver bullet. It will not substitute for a strong culture or for stronger management. But when you have those fundamentals in place, this system of getting everybody clear on what matters can take you to the moon. I've seen it myself.
So let's talk about the O, though, and the KR.
Oh, yeah, excuse me. The O is the objective. That's what we want to have accomplished. And great objectives are strategic and inspirational, and they're specific, and they're paired, they're coupled with key results. Objectives are the whats, the key results are the hows, and that's where you write down specifically what you're going to get done to achieve that objective. Like dominate the microprocessor market. That's kind of debatable whether or not we do it, but if you get the right key results, get 10 new design wins, and put the advanced processor into production and so forth, achieving those specific, well-chosen key results will guarantee you meet the objective. And so the system is deceptively simple, which makes it seductive to engineers anyway, that you'd write these things down, you'd measure them, and you can change them along the way, but it allows for a kind of accountability and transparency.
So let's say that I wanted to use OKRs. You talk in the book about how OKRs can be used for companies, they can be used for nonprofits, they can be used for global health organizations. Let's take a really simple example. Me. Let's say that
What is your objective?
Let's say that I want to be healthier. Maybe I want
to be healthy. Perfect. What are your key results for the next 90 days?
The next 90 days, you said in the book that numbers are really important. So maybe
if it doesn't have a number, it's not a key result.
That seems important. So maybe I want to run 2 miles a day.
Yeah.
That's a box that I can check. I want to eat no more than 1 pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream per week.
All right.
That's another number. And I want more than 2 people to comment on my changed appearance. I want to look healthier.
That's a stretch.
So that's a stretch goal. Ouch. And so am I doing it right, though? Is the objective should be
This is a
broad goal?
well-formed set of key results and objectives. And the beautiful thing is that you've thought them up. If I had an objective to be healthy, and my doctor told me I should run a marathon, that's a lot less motivating than if I choose to run the marathon to get to the objective. So separating the objective from the key results. Look, in business, as I learned from Jim Barksdale, there's lots of right answers. What's important is you choose them, get really clear about them, and then drive them until you achieve them or decide they're no longer relevant. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I put that drawing in the book, shows us that the intrinsic motives, the ones that come from within, are way more powerful than the bonuses or the extrinsic ones.
You mentioned in the book that Google might be the most famous company, most famous example of incorporating OKRs in the way that they do business, in the way that all of their employees are aligned. When I read that sentence, I texted 3 friends that I have that work at Google, do you know what OKRs were? Within 15 seconds, they were like, how could we not, how could we not? I mean, it permeates the culture of Google. Tell me, though, about your first meeting with Sergey and Larry and how you sold them on this formula.
Well, I don't think any organization has deployed OKRs at greater scale, embraced them more thoroughly than the Google crowd did. And I remember in 1999, right after we'd invested, I'd written the largest check of my life at the highest valuation, backing 2 college dropouts who had no business model. I mean, this was lunacy. I went on down and I said, hey guys, I want to do a slideshow for you. It's actually Andy Grove's slideshow. And I've been doing this thing now 100 times for decades because I think it might help you manage the company, maybe. So I went through my slideshow, and they were rapt in their attention. They were on the bean bags. We were around the ping pong table that was served as a boardroom table. And at the end of it, I said to Sergey, what do you think? He said, John, we're going to enthusiastically... Actually, that's not what he said. What he really said was, we don't have any better way to manage this company, so let's give this a try. and I took that as an endorsement, just for the record. And every quarter since then, every Googler has written down her objectives and key results and graded them at the end of the quarter and then set them aside because they're never used for bonuses or promotions. If they were, people might sandbag. A good grade is to get 70% of them done. If you get 100%, you were sandbagging. If it's 0, that's another kind of problem. And the Googlers say they can't imagine running the place without it.
Yeah. So this is a book about how businesses work, but it's also a book about leadership. And this is an interesting point in time for a book like this to be published because it seems to me that we're at a bit of a crisis moment for leadership. You have collapsing trust in institutions across the country, in politics, in religion, in culture, and especially in technology. And as I was reading this book, I was thinking about Facebook and Uber and Wells Fargo, and thinking the problem with these companies doesn't seem to me that they didn't match their goals, but that they matched the wrong goals. That Facebook, for example, maximized for user attention and forgot about truth. That Uber maximized for growth and forgot about ethics. That Wells Fargo maximized for checking accounts and forgot about decency. How do you incorporate morality into this paradigm?
So remember I said objectives answer the question, what? Key results answer the question, how? The most important question is why. And the answer to the question why is your mission and your values. And I like to think of OKRs as a kind of transparent set of vessels, sturdy vessels, clear, necessary. But you pour into those vessels your values, the answer to the question, why am I doing this work in my nonprofit? Why is this important to my family? Why does this matter to our business? And I'm not going to comment specifically on any of those organizations you named, but I think broadly, if we were clear with the whys, the mission and the values, and transparent with the goals that flow from those, this new workforce will call us on it. The millennials want to know how they fit in the big picture. They want constant feedback. They don't want to be micromanaged. But they also have high expectations for why. Why it is we do this work matters an awful lot. And so the book, the second part of the book is about values, really, and how we choose those values. Andy Grove chose the values very carefully. And when you pick an objective, you express values as well. I'm going to tell you the story about Chrome at Google, if I can. It's one of the better stories in this book. There was a product manager by the name of Sundar Pichai, and he inherited from Larry Page, the founder, the goal to develop the next generation platform for web applications. Pretty highfalutin, huh? What it really meant is build the best browser, because Microsoft had nearly flattened us over there at Netscape with their Internet Explorer. Larry set out to very carefully choose the objective, which is what we wish Wells Fargo had done, which is what we wish Theranos has done. What objective did he choose? He didn't choose number of downloads or advertising revenues or click-throughs. All of those could have been measures. He said, you know, the one objective will be numbers of users. If I get more users for Chrome, I don't care if we make money with it or not, then I will achieve the objective of building the world's best browser. So the key result was number of users. In the first year, his goal was 30 million. I think he got to 11. He missed it by a mile. What did he do the next year? He kept the same objective, but he upped the ante to 50 million. In that year, he got 35 million signed-on users. Again, he missed it. Third year, stayed with the same objective. He upped the ante to 100 million users. This is described in the book. And you know what happened? He blew it away. Through a better advertising program, better technology, more distribution, 111 million users for a free. Anybody remember what the internet was like in 2007? It was slow. The browsers were slow, and Chrome was fast. So why do I like that story? Not so much because he eventually succeeded, but because it shows the importance and thoughtfulness of choosing the right objectives. Look, here's the point. Many of us are setting goals the wrong way. Most of us are not setting and writing down our goals at all. Do you have written down your personal objectives and key results? And are they the right ones? That's what this book's about.
I will say, when the book was sent to me, the packet came with very, very helpful flashcards that had objective at the top, followed by a line, and then a space for key results. And actually, I was doing a podcast series for the last 2 months, and I started using that, and it was very, very useful. I want to turn back to tech, though. I know that you said that you're not going to comment specifically on what Facebook should do, what Uber should do, but I want to stay in this area.
Yeah, let's do it.
Is it fair, do you think, to say that tech is under attack?
Sure, yeah.
Tech is under attack, you think? Do you think it's fair that they're under attack?
I think it's a large part of the economy in our lives. Of course it should be critiqued. Attacked, whatever. I mean, I can't tell the difference between a critique and an attack. I think for every large internet company, it's really clear that privacy matters enormously, security matters enormously. And you've got to get those two things right so that you can have trust with your customers, and if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Do you think
and people are learning along the way here.
As I look through the list of the most successful tech companies, many of which were purely celebrated 10 years ago, Amazon and Google and Facebook, almost all of them are the subject of a great degree of criticism today. And I wonder whether you think it's because of a failure of leadership, a change in the sort of temperature of how America thinks about tech, or something else that's related to the book. Is it the fault of tech, or have times changed?
Well, for sure, times have changed. And some of the problems are the fault of tech. A lot of these organizations you mentioned actually have good people running them. They don't have bad leaders. But as I said earlier, I think society writ large has some really bad and unethical leaders. We don't have to go into who they are, but it wasn't like that, in my experience, a decade ago. And we also have some really great institutions, companies, government agencies, institutions that are failing us because they weren't clear and right about their objectives. So you can't just read this book and solve the problem, but I guarantee you if we're going to right these wrongs, which is not going to be easy, it's going to take time, it's going to take transparency, and yes, we're going to have to measure what matters.
Yes. I wonder, though, whether you think, it seems really interesting to me, really strange, but also just from a journalistic perspective, fascinating, that the most powerful companies in America right now, many of which used to be seen as paragons of the way business should be done, are all under some form of criticism, whether it's antitrust, whether it's data privacy, whether it's fake news and things like this. Do you think it's become more difficult to be the leader of a company today? Do you think that the demands on leaders of large organizations and large companies have changed and that to a certain extent it's become an impossible job?
I don't think it's an impossible job, but I think it's a harder job. And I think that list of criticisms, which you've fairly summed up, doesn't apply to everyone. I mean, this is a good conversation to have. It would take some time, but antitrust law is different in the U.S. for good reasons than it is in Europe. Privacy issues are the province of national governments, so we have GDPR actually throughout Europe. This is a good thing to have more privacy. It can go too far, and it will squelch innovation from entrepreneurs who are just saying, I'm not going to serve those markets. I can't afford to do it. Is that the internet we want? I do not think so. But I think the major mind shift for the Silicon Valley companies is to move away from being popular, and they were icons, covers of all these magazines, to being trusted. Let's set aside popularity, go for trust. And I think that's a priority.
So that popularity used to be the key objective, like the top of the page.
It might not have been said that way, but that's my sense.
Yeah.
I mean, what do I know?
Well, give me an example, though, of how a company can earn trust. If trust is the objective, what would be a key result?
Well, the first way, it's a really good question. I would measure it in terms of a version of the Net Promoter Score that would be a net trust score. So I'd arrange a set of questions, very simple questions. And these surveys are out there. People trust Google more than they do some other large internet companies. People trust Apple more than they do other ones. Apple's staked out some really clear principles with respect to privacy. It's caused some people who care about terrorism to be upset that federal authorities can't go find out what's on someone's iPhone. There's a battle between James Comey and Tim Cook. So there's not a glib answer for all these. I think each of them are meaningful problems that matter.
In addition to sort of a crisis of trust in tech, another issue that tech has faced recently is the issue of gender diversity. Kleiner Perkins was sued by Ellen Pao for gender bias. This was a national story. She lost the case. But whether or not she had a case, it is an unequivocal fact that Silicon Valley has a gender inequality crisis. The two stats that I found that struck me the most are, one, all female founders, so founders where all the founders are women, got 2% of venture capital dollars in 2017. All male teams got 79%. So that's stat number one, 79 to 2. And the second is that of the top 100 venture capital firms, the percentage of female partners is 8%.
That's pathetic.
It is pathetic. What's wrong? What's going on?
So you touched on a lot of topics there. I don't want to turn the whole conversation into this, but it's really important. It matters a lot to me. And on the Ellen Powell part of this, it makes me sad when anybody comes to Kleiner, doesn't have a good experience. And I'm human, all of my partners are human. That was a painful time. I think she's doing good work now, and I really wish her well. There was a trial, 5 weeks of testimony, a jury of a dozen men and women, for the record, found out that Kleiner didn't discriminate, didn't retaliate, didn't engage in any of those claims. But at the same time that trial on that case was going on, there was a larger trial. Society came to the conclusion that the venture industry, the tech industry, is failing, is guilty, is woefully inadequate of achieving what's just a good old basic business objective, diversity. Diverse groups make better business decisions. They simply do. We have a range of problems and excuses about why we don't have diversity in the tech industry, the pipeline and so forth. But I want to tell you there's 3 things that my partners and I can do in our little world to go deal with this. And the first is to affect the mix of our own partnership. 7% of investing partners in venture firms are female, 21% at Kleiner Perkins. And I'm not going to be satisfied until it's 50-50, until it reflects the markets we're trying to serve. So that's an issue. The next has to do with our portfolio. You're right. The number's 2.7% of founders or CEOs funded by venture capitalists are female. Can you believe that?
I cannot.
It's extraordinary.
No, it stunned me.
So Kleiner's track record on this is it's 9%. It's not very good. It's 3 times the industry average, but not very good. We have a mission to make as much money as we possibly can for the endowments and the nonprofits who give us their money. We have a mission also to make really great investment decisions, great companies. And that leads us to the third thing that we're doing, which is to work on the pipeline. We have a program called the Kleiner Fellows Program. It's harder to get into than to get into Harvard. More applicants, fewer admitted. In 2013, 10% of the class was female. And we set a goal to get to 50-50 as fast as we could. We got there this year, and 10% of the fellows are African American. So we are not there. I'm not satisfied with where we are. I'm not proud of my industry, my firm. But we got to keep working at this.
It's really interesting to me that you broke it down sort of as an issue that has a top-down element and a bottom-up element. That to a certain extent you can feed the pipeline. You can help women and minorities get better access to networking, better access to mentoring, put them in a network of other people where they can share ideas.
Just put women in power.
Yeah.
Put them on boards.
And that's the second issue. I think the bottom-up effort is great, and it's heartening, the fact you've gotten to 50-50 for men and women and 10% African Americans. But the top-down issue still strikes me as either a moral failure or a absurd myopia. This idea that if it is indeed true that diverse groups are better thinkers and that diversity is good for business, why doesn't the venture capital community seem to understand this? Because they clearly don't if 92% of their partners are men and 7.3% of their investments aren't going to all women founders. What case do you have to make to your peers in Silicon Valley and throughout the country to persuade them that they're wrong?
Well, I have to work extra hard at it, to tell you the truth, because I've been an advocate for this for a long time. And again, not for reasons of social justice, but because you make better business decisions with diverse groups. But then people look at me and say, yeah, John, you got out there, and what happened to your partnership? There's a lot of venture firms that don't want to take on that risk. And that's wrong.
So what do you do? What is the winning argument? If your objective, if your O is increasing the share of female partners at venture capital firms in Silicon Valley and throughout California, let's say, that's your O, what are the key results?
My key result is to focus on partners at Kleiner and to drive that number up. The other venture capitalists aren't stupid. They're aware of this problem. You just have to work harder. I think when you're a CEO or a founder, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, until you can make no further progress, is you recruit talent into your team. And if you want diverse talent, you go recruit diverse talent. If you build an engineering organization out of a dozen engineers from MIT and they're all male, I'll tell you, it's really hard for the 13th engineer, the talented female, to go join that organization.
Right.
They're not like me. I think you've screwed yourself. So start early, start often, work hard.
We have about 20 minutes left. I have just a few more questions, then we'll turn to Q&A, so start thinking of your cues. I want to end with politics. You hint at politics a little bit in the book. There are some stories about policy, about using this paradigm to fix a healthcare policy, for example. But when you look at these ideas, at this set of ideas, what part of our impossibly collapsing political system do you think I could go to them with this idea and make the biggest difference really, really quickly?
So would you state the question one more?
Sure. I mean, there's so many different political problems that you can address. But what is the low-hanging fruit for OKRs? What's the low-hanging fruit for your theory for how to get things done? Where you could go into, is it a mayor's office, a governor's mansion?
So my theory of change may not be ambitious enough. And indeed, OKRs were used by Sylvia Matthews-Burrell to manage the Ebola crisis, to coordinate a multi-agency government against some very clear, time-driven, measurable objectives and key results. My dream is that we can get some large, important part of the federal government with a bold and dynamic leader to use OKRs to transform what ought to be a transparent, measurable kind of service.
Can you give an example?
Well, my favorite would be to go after some part of HHS CMS, maybe Medicaid. We just now, for the first time, are getting the data on the 70 million poor, disabled, or people with special needs who are supported by the Medicaid system. Every state differs. What if we had transparency? We could compare those states, state by state. And we have in this administration an administrator, Seema Verma, who's prepared to take that on. She says, let the data go out there. And then the taxpayers and the market can decide. So I would love to find not just a big federal agency, but also a local city government, right? What if a city government, all the elected representatives said, we're going to have these objectives. We've agreed at least on this. We're going to measure our progress this way, and it's going to be okay to fall somewhat short. Now, maybe I'm crazy, and we can't do that in our political life. But I'm witnessing people in unusual institutions adopt this. Tom Friedman's daughter, Orly Friedman, runs the Khan Lab School. Have I described this already?
No, you've not.
Okay.
Just to me.
This is fascinating. I had no idea she was doing this. She said, John, we're going to use OKRs for our sixth graders. I said, really, what does that mean? And she said, well, they've got their class assignments and they need their grades every week. But I'm having every one of those students write down their quarterly and annual learning objective and share it with all the other teachers in the school and their parents, and we're going to mark down our progress against that. What if we did that in a network of charter public schools in our underserved communities? I think we're at a moment in time where there's a crisis and a great need for great leaders. And what did you say about great leaders, Jim? They're made leaders by their team or something? How'd that go? Okay.
He doesn't be put on the spot.
Okay. Jim, draw a big distinction between managers who get their authority through position and leaders who earn their positions through followership. And if we got a crisis in the country, I think it's a crisis of leadership, and we're hungry for it. And this isn't the cure, but it's a system that works when leaders embrace it. And by the way, the easiest way for this to fail is for the CEO to lose interest or not be committed. If that's the case, don't try. And as you bring in new CEOs, they may not believe in the system. That's a good time for a refresher commitment to it.
Great. John, thank you very much. Do we have questions from the audience? We've got one right here. You can wait for the mic.
Nina McLemore, and while I feel very strongly about promoting women, I think we need to look earlier, and my question is, where do we start? Whether it's women, Hispanics, Afro-Americans, or other minorities in the world of technology or business, they're not in the STEM programs, they're not at the same level as men in the MBA program, so I think it goes back a long way. So I don't think it's just the end that we need to look at, but I think it's the beginning. And so my question is, how do we do that?
That's a really good question, and I'm not an authority on this. I really, I wish Sheryl Sandberg or somebody else was here who's worked hard on this problem. I'm sorry to not have a good answer for you, but it's the truth.
I thought they were picking on you. It's not just the end problem.
I didn't feel picked on. like many of us, I'm a father of daughters, and I think what you try to do is give your kids the notion that they're unconditionally lovable and they can accomplish anything they set out to do, because then maybe they'll try. But fundamentally, they got to be pursuing their own dreams and passions, not mine. So early STEM education, great parenting at home. I think the tougher question is, what do you do when you don't have one or more great parents in a family?
Do you have another question? Right back there? Oh, no, we'll start in here. Yeah, but we'll start here, and then we'll get you, sir.
My name is Tom Dunton, and I spent a career in a large organization, a bank, multinational bank, all of it overseas. And we had objectives, and we had goals, and we were measured. And what I'd like to learn from you, John, is what is unique about your OKRs, different from what we had over the years. One distinction might be that we got bonuses and promotions based upon our success against our goals. And you do not propose that. Other than that, what's the real unique aspect of your OKRs as distinguished from what I did for 30 years in a large organization where we had objectives and goals and were measured?
So there may be little or no difference. I don't know. I'd have to hear about your organization. I'd be glad to talk with you afterwards. Broadly, when I'm looking at a large company, like the largest employer in the country, or other organizations that are established, these are not Silicon Valley startups or Googles. They're in the heartland of our country. I find that the goals are not transparent. They're not available on a website where everybody can see everybody's. They're not self-graded. They are, in fact, tied to bonuses or promotions. They are not used in, we didn't talk at all about CFRs, but they're not used in the flow of the business, the weekly staff meetings, the one-on-ones. So I think for most places, they're pretty different.
You should talk about CFRs. Let's talk about how you...
So we spent a lot of time talking about the first half of this book, which is OKRs, which is setting the goals. My football analogy for you is the objective is the goalpost, right? And the key results are the 10-yard markers as we march our way to our objective. If you got the right key results and you achieve them, you'll achieve the objective for sure. But there's a lot more going on to have a team be operationally excellent or win a game. There's the huddles, there's the substitutions, there's the plays that you're calling in the meantime. These are the conversations, feedback, and recognition, CFR for OKRs, that are what you do to bring to life all these goals. And then if you can take those two systems and infuse them with values that people remember, that they live, that they believe in, you can go to the moon.
Back there, please.
Hi, I'm Carol Wedge, and I wondered if you don't use the OKRs for comp, what's your insight in progressive ways to think about bonus and salary and compensation?
That's a great question, and I'm going to, if I can, add on to it. People say, but John, I want my sales force to be paid on commissions, on sales, the quota. Are you telling me that that's not a key objective of the company? And the truth of the matter is it can be both. There'll be a handful of things that you pay bonuses based on. But if those are the entirety of the stretch goals for your organization, then you've missed the opportunity to have a real aggressive risk-taking culture. You got to look in the mirror and say, is it okay to fail here? Do I want that kind of culture? Some organizations don't. They want a very conservative, by the numbers, I'm going to achieve it all. And one more thing. OKRs are not the sum total of everything that's going on in your team and your organization. They're the few things that deserve special attention. There's a lot of other stuff going on in your nonprofit that matters.
Great. Over here, please. Oh, sorry, were you in the process of finding someone? I saw a hand up over there. Right there, okay.
Hi, I'm Ginny Galisa now. And John, I love that you said that you have used this, you could use OKRs with families. Could you give an example of how you might use OKRs with a family?
Yeah, I have had a family objective, which was to have a, I don't know, I think it was a healthy family in the broadest sense of that word. And one of my key results was I was going to be home for dinner 20 nights a month by 6 p.m., and I was going to be present. In fact, we all were going to be. So we turned off the router for the internet. And this was a key result. I shared with my executive assistant, and we graded ourselves on it, and it was really hard. I got about 70% of that 20-night-a-month goal done. And I know of other families that use these. There was one father who wanted to be part of helping his kid hit a home run. And so one of the key results was a double, and then a triple, and then the home run, and they knocked him off through the course of the quarter.
Got a question back. We're going to start there, and then we'll go over there. Yes, sir.
My name is Nick Triana with Unite America, and we've been using OKRs since I came on board to run the organization. And
Where?
One question I had was, what advice do you have for setting OKRs when you have sort of external dependencies? Say it could be user growth dealing with earned media that's hard to predict,
Yeah.
or external dependencies and other stakeholders that you're...
You know, Jeff Bezos has a really radical approach to this. And he strongly prefers, well, simplicity first, but second, only measuring inputs, only setting goals around inputs as opposed to outputs.
Give me an example of
So
only measuring inputs.
in the time I was on the board there, we didn't have any sales numbers as goals or objectives. Jeff said, we can't control that. Those are external. What we can control is price, selection, and convenience in a very specific and measurable way. And that's part of the Amazon hedgehog cycle and has been since the beginning. So if I can have my prices be 10% lower than any other online seller, and I can have a broader selection than anyone else, and have a great customer experience as measured by net promoter scores or whatever, I'm happy. And then the revenues will be what the revenues will be.
Can I pause just briefly on that?
Yeah.
Because it's so radical. I mean, how do you feel about talking to other companies and saying, you know, there's this Amazon model.
There's a movement underway right now that Warren Buffett is championing that says stop making quarterly EPS forecasts. He wants other quarterly forecasts and reporting and indicators on the business. But that's a degree of freedom that public companies in America don't generally have, unless, like Jeff, they write a very clear, transparent letter to their shareholders saying, we're this kind of company, this is where we're going to behave, we might not be the right investor. And Larry Page has written that kind of letter for the Google shareholders. I mean, yes, it is radical, but it's not totally weird.
Right. Just to stay on Amazon for 2 more seconds before we go to the next question, I do think that a really interesting implication of that idea is the fact that Jeff Bezos was incredibly explicit, more explicit than almost any other CEO I can think of, about his objectives from the start. He said, do not judge us on our quarterly profit. We are in this for the long run. We are in this for maximizing cash flow, and so we are going to do things that might not make sense to the investment community. And this was in the 97 letter. This isn't a letter that's 21 years old now. Do you think that there is a benefit for a new company, and maybe even a company that's about to become public or looking for investors, to be this transparent about their goals with all of their investors, to say, judge us on this, because we're going to be maniacal about this metric, even if it's not the metric you think a company like us should be maniacal about?
Yes.
That was easy. Next question.
I want to say something about transparency, though. Okay. A certain transparency, Amazon has a lot of secrets. They're transparent with their shareholders about the things that matter. They are more disciplined on messaging than any company I know of. Jeff will almost never say anything that is not a customer benefit. And by being focused on that, he says, he's not trying to beat the competition. He's trying to obsess on the customer. And this is true of other really fine companies. One of the things that impresses me about the Google use of OKRs is they've never leaked. Really detailed goals. They're all available on a website in terms of the company. It would not be googly to leak that. And if you did, you'd be summarily fired. And people know that. There's consequences.
I will note for the record that I asked my friends OKRs, and I did not get them. So they are, iron tight. Right over here.
Hi, I'm Altai, president of GlenX. John, I just had more of a personal question. So in your opinion, what type of, innovations are you personally most passionate about progressing for future impact?
What sort of innovations am I investing in personally? I'm particularly interested in healthcare system transformation at this moment in time. The country spends $3.3 trillion on healthcare. Broad agreement about a third of that's unnecessary, duplicative, or we don't get the kinds of returns from it that other developed nations would. If I had to spare $1 trillion right now in the American economy, man, what we could do with R&D, what we could do with education, what we could do to make America stronger would be really quite remarkable. And I think the IT industry has poorly served the healthcare industry. And we've got exactly, there aren't evil people here, we've got exactly the healthcare system that we, the voters, with our policies, have asked for. So that's one thing that's engaged me a lot. But the second answer I'd like to give you to the question is that these, there seem to be tectonic waves of innovation that cause exponential change. And interestingly, every 13 years or so. So in the 1990s, it was the 1980s, it was the microchip in the PC. And from 1980, where we had Microsoft and Intel and Lotus and Compaq and all those companies, through about 93, then Jim Clark, in this 21, maybe he was 18-year-old kid, Mark Andreessen, wrote a browser at the University of Illinois. And Jim Barksdale stepped up to build a company out of it. And that launched the internet revolution, an order of magnitude bigger than the PC revolution. From 94 for 13 years till 2006, 2007. The internet revolution, Amazon, Google, all those companies. What happened then? In 2006, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone 1 with no app store. He did not want his phone polluted with the applications of third parties. And Diane Green launched VMware with cloud computing. So we got mobility and cloud computing at the same time. Monster effect on productivity, education, entertainment, our markets, how we live, communicate. It's 13 years later, right? 2006, 2019, what's next?
What's next?
I don't know.
You're the head of venture capital, Kleiner Perkins.
But my theory,
Easily writer.
what I believe it is, where I'm investing, is in a field that's been overhyped, and I think now is underappreciated, and that's real deep neural network artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is a whole new style of programming and learning. And we won't get self-driving cars without it. We won't get advanced diagnoses of cancer. I think AI will be a big game changer. Google now describes itself, it used to be a mobile company or a search browser company. Now they say we're an AI company.
One follow-up before our last question. If we're at the beginning of this 13-year cycle, and the 13-year cycle is neural technologies, AI, what is a product that will exist in 13 years that will be obvious to everybody in this room that's just beyond our sort of horizon of understanding at the moment?
It's going to be obvious right now.
It's going to be obvious right now?
That it's going to be obvious right now? Or?
That it's going to be obvious in 13 years. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm going to go to healthcare.
Okay.
Where we generate more data than anywhere else. Healthcare cuts deep. People die. People go bankrupt. I mean, this is not a casual kind of video game. This is the real deal. I think we'll be talking to agents that will certainly have AI assisting them. Maybe there'll be some human involvement over our Alexas or our voice ambient ways of experiencing healthcare. Patients are not going to have to go to doctors. Doctors are going to come to them. And or healthcare professionals will do that. There'll be something, I have no idea what it is, but it'll be called Prime Health. You got 70 million Americans who are paying $100 a year, roughly, to get movies and same-day delivery.
From Amazon.
From Amazon. What's a really trusted brand? There's an enormous opportunity there. And I think doctors who are overworked and burning out today are going to get way more leverage the old idea, the electronic medical record where you have to fill these things out, voice will take care of that. I think AI will be truly transformational in a way that makes us healthier and wealthier, and I can't wait to see it happen.
Well, that is the perfect place to end. Plus, I see triple zeros. So thank you, everybody, very much.